And for more, Dr. Myong-hyun, a research fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So like we heard in the report, U.S. Representative Stephen Biegun says Washington is not going to do denuclearization incrementally, adding that they need a total solution, so putting forward an all-or-nothing approach. Now, he insisted that the North has to remove all its weapons of mass destruction, as well as its chemical and biological weapons. Until now, he had been considered a little bit more flexible than the other negotiators. How should we interpret this?
Well, this is, I think, a little bit of too much of a hardline position making by Steve Biegun and the U.S. government, because so far one of the, I would say, progress being made. One area that North Korea and the United States haven't been able to make progress on was what kind of denuclearization approach the two sides agreed to take. And then it seemed, before Hanoi at least, that the two sides had agreed to take a gradual approach towards denuclearization, which actually creates less stress on either side. But this time, I think the U.S. has come up very strong. It's reverting back to the hardline position that he had back in 2017. But the problem here is that back in 2017, the hardline U.S. position could be justified by the fact that North Korea was engaged in a semi-permanent pattern of provocation. This time, there's not such a thing going on. So it'll be, I think it will be difficult for the U.S. government to push ahead with this stance for the foreseeable future, because there's no counterpart and action coming from the North Korea in this case.
So Biegun's remarks are more or less in line with National Security Advisor John Bolton of what he has been saying all along. And Bolton has been actively making comments regarding North Korea these days. Now, do you see a possible shift in Washington's policy towards North Korea? Well,
there's always been some duality when it comes to U.S. policy towards North Korea. We knew that President Trump was more on the side of dialogue. On the other hand, the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, was more on the part of unilateral denuclearization. Let's put it that way. And there's always been this duality, and Bolton's position, the policy position, was always below the surface. This time, after what happened in Hanoi with the breakdown of talks, Bolton's position came out stronger. It doesn't mean that it's a new pattern or like a new approach by the U.S. government. So this is a problem, though. I mean, the only reason why the John Bolton's position of unilateral disarmament of North Korea came forward was because President Trump has decided to prefer that approach over the other, the previous one of gradualist approach towards denuclearization. So it's really up to President Trump to decide whether he will continue with this policy stance or not. And this, I think, is going to cause trouble to U.S. credibility and reputation, because if President Trump changes approach again down the road, then I think it will be very difficult for the international community to rally behind the United States.
So both Bolton and Biegun say the door is still open for dialogue with North Korea, but if it's taking this harder line approach, do you think down the road negotiations with North Korea could get a little bit harder?
Definitely. I think what we are seeing right now is slow reversal of respective policy positions towards what we have seen back in 2017. More of a hardline, more of a standoff, and two sides are making very clear that they are not going to move away from the original position. In North Korea was partial denuclearization, the part of the United States complete denuclearization. So I think this is going to be a problem.
So a North Korean propaganda outlet said Tuesday that Pyongyang remains firmly committed to denuclearization. Now, it also said that the two sides agreed to continue productive dialogues to resolve the issues discussed at the Hanoi summit. Now, it's the first time that the North Korea media has brought this up about complete denuclearization. How do you think the North has completed its analysis of the breakdown of the Hanoi summit?
I think North Korea has also been changing its approach towards negotiating with the United States even before Hanoi. We know for a fact that North Korea wasn't too content with continuing dialogue under the framework of North Korea's complete denuclearization first, and maybe lifting of sanctions down the road. So I think North Korea has been resisting or participating in this kind of framework, but then there's been enough diplomatic incentive, not just from the United States, but also from South Korea, to remain this framework of dialogue. Now that the talk broke down in Hanoi, I think North Korea will have to push. I mean, I think North Korea will push again for taking step-by-step approach towards denuclearization. There's no doubt that North Korea is committed, North Korea says it's committed to complete denuclearization, but what really matters here is how we approach complete denuclearization.
So you think the North Korean leadership has drawn out follow-up measures?
Yeah.
Now, this comes at a time when there have been reports that North Korea could take provocative action following satellite imagery showing repair work at its Dongchangli missile launch site. Now, what do you think the North's intentions are?
Well, this is one way to signal to the United States that first, the Dongchangli missile site, which many consider to be redundant or superfluous to the negotiation because it's already one single facility and probably already been spent out by the North Koreans. There's less use for them. It actually represents some value because North Korea can stage provocation from Dongchangli site, so which increase the value of Dongchangli as a bargaining chip. Second is that North Korea is sending strong signal to Washington that North Korea stopped the provocation back in 2017, but then they can take it up when they left off back then. So this is a way to remind the United States that the President Trump's red line of no further testing cannot be kept if the United States insists on unilateral denuclearization of North Korea.
So on one part, there's imagery showing that there may be repair work going on. On the other hand, it's using its media saying that it's still committed to complete denuclearization. Do you think it's providing some clues as to how things will shape out on the Korean Peninsula? So
it's back to the stage where the two sides are going to argue over what kind of approach they're going to take towards denuclearization. Again, North Korea wants a step-by-step denuclearization, where North Korea's denuclearization step will be matched by economic incentives on the part of the United States. The United States is reverted back to the position of North Korea complete denuclearization first, followed by lifting of sanctions. So they are going to fight over this again.
U.S. Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security Andrea Thompson says that a third summit between Kim Jong-un and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump is likely without having set a specific date. Now, President Trump and Secretary Pompeo obviously remain open to dialogue. This is what we've been hearing for the past couple of weeks. But she said, how likely do you think a summit is at this point? And if so, when do you think these talks will get back on track?
Well, you already know the outcome of the Hanoi summit. We know why the talk broke down, and the reasons because North Korea wanted almost a complete lifting of the economic sanctions in exchange for shutting down Yongbyon. That's the line that the North Korea is holding on to. It's very clear that there's also a condition for continuing the talks with the United States, including holding the third summit with President Trump. So it's very clear if the U.S. accepts that condition or recognize that that's something negotiable for the United States, then it's possible that we will have a third summit between the two leaders. If that's not the case, that what Stephen Biegun said today or yesterday about U.S. current negotiating position, it's unlikely that there will be another summit.
Shifting gears a little bit, according to a report by the UN Security Council by a panel of international experts, they say North Korea may be evading sanctions. The report says that Pyongyang has been accelerating its imports of petroleum products through illicit ship-to-ship transfers, as well as stepping up its coal exports. Now, the UN plans to investigate possible companies or individuals in Asia who have been aiding North Korea by secretly purchasing centrifuges for its uranium enrichment. Do you think this could be a variable in the future talks between Pyongyang and Washington?
It's already a variable, but then we know that President Trump has refrained from announcing stepping up the pressure on North Korea. I mean, it's possible the United States might ramp up more sanctions measures on North Korea, but in order to target, say, for instance, the illegal ship-to-ship transfer of oil, that probably will require another United Nations Security Council resolution. So with China and Russia firmly against the idea of ramping up the economic pressure on North Korea, that seems unlikely. So I think, sanctions could, I think where the direction of the talks will be headed in the future, will be talking about the idea of adding more sanctions, but without really executing the idea.
So this kind of report actually makes it harder for the U.S. to make a move in terms of sanctions relief, though.
It could be. But then I would say that the U.S. is fully knowledgeable about it, and also these are actually still have to be confirmed by the United Nations panel of experts investigation.
Now, moving over to South Korea, Seoul appears to be working hard behind the scenes to keep up the inter-Korean peace drive and keeping close contact with both Washington and Beijing on the matter. Now, Seoul's top security advisor, Jongun, was reportedly due to hold a phone conversation with his U.S. counterpart, John Bolton, on Monday evening. Now, the Blue House has yet to confirm whether the call has happened or not, but can we presume that they discussed the recent satellite imagery?
Well, in addition to other things, I think Seoul has a fundamentally a different interpretation of what happened in Hanoi from the United States. I think Washington seems to view what happened in Hanoi as a success, in the sense that the United States made it very clear that they are no longer going to tolerate the partial denuclearization of North Korea. I think Seoul has a different interpretation. I think Seoul saw what happened in Hanoi as a manifestation by North Korea that they are not going to engage in further dialogue unless there's some sort of lifting of sanctions beforehand. So I think there's a fundamental different interpretation, and I think Jong-young, National Security Advisor Jong-young, is really trying to reconcile these two different interpretations and make that into a more coherent joint policy by the two governments.
So Secretary Chung Eui-yong also reportedly traveled to China last weekend for a meeting with China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi. Sources say the two discussed the Hanoi summit as well as possible follow-up measures. What issues do you think were brought up here?
Well, I think China and South Korea right now have a lot of overlapping interest. They want to make sure that North Korea stays engaged in dialogue. Probably it's a different concern that the United States has. I think South Korea and China are worried that North Korea is starting the initial stage of a disengagement from dialogue that we have already experienced several times in history in the last 2 decades. So I think the tone of the conversation that Jong Eui-yong is going to have with his Chinese counterpart will be different from the conversation that he's going to have with his American counterpart.
So we can see that Seoul is maintaining contact with both Washington and Beijing, but at this point, what sort of role will South Korea be required to play moving forward? Because we're almost now 2 weeks after the breakdown of the summit.
Well, I think South Korea will try to convince Washington to back off from this idea of imposing this unilateral denuclearization Pyongyang. I think down the road, I think South Korean government will try to convince President Trump especially to essentially soften his stance towards North Korea, make it more flexible. I think that's going to be the task that South Korea has embarked on.
How do you see Seoul's approach in wanting to use inter-Korean cooperation to keep these dialogues going?
It's money to provide incentive for North Korea to stay engaged. I think that's, again, that's a concern that the South Korean government has.
So do you think the North Korea is possibly trying to use as a leverage by repairing its missile launch site?
Well, I think repairing the missile launch site is clearly a signaling move. I don't think North Korea is going to go ahead with actual testing of the missile itself. I think that's going to be a deal breaker for everybody, including South Korea. So I think it's just a signaling action on the part of North Korea. On the other hand, South Korea will try to incentivize North Korea to stay engaged, because we also understand that North Korea needs urgent economic assistance.
When do you think would it be appropriate for possibly Moon Jae-in, South Korea's President Moon Jae-in, to have a summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think it's really up to Kim Jong-un now. I mean, we know President Moon would like to have a very fast-paced shuttle diplomacy between Seoul and Pyongyang, also the Seoul and Washington. But what's really going on is that Pyongyang and Washington are trying to make clear that they have a very clear line and when it comes to negotiation with each other. So I think President Moon would like to convince Kim to come to Seoul or have a meeting in Panmunjom. But I think Kim is going to wait out and then see some sort of a change of position on Washington first.
So hopefully we'll be able to see some positive developments. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for your insights.
My pleasure.